Now, chapter 18 starts, like, literally the first paragraph is just her describing what Carden is wearing. And if you ignore the rafter scene, the last time they really truly interacted with one another was when he came to Maddox's camp. And when he didn't, he was stripped down wearing a very basic, simple outfit. And it seemed unusual to her because the only other time she had ever seen him wear something like that was when he proposed and wedded to her. And in both cases, it's a stripped down, bare version of Carden. He is exposing just himself. But now he is back into wearing his hiking costume. But I think it's really interesting what he's wearing because the high jeweled collar of Jet, it's, you know, jewels of his status, but also it's a high collar protecting his neck, a vulnerable spot, a spot that she had held a dagger to previously. On a stiff black doublet, you know, the stiff and rigidity of his clothes matching the stiff and rigidity of his role that he has to play, the coldness, you know, matching the black doublet. But over the top of the pointed ears with knife-like caps of gold, accenting that he is fairy with the pointing to the ears. But the knife-like is interesting because it's showing that he is not as vulnerable or defenseless as others might assume. And then the gold along his cheekbones, going back to, you know, our first interactions with Carden in book 1, he was often wearing gold on his cheekbones. When Carden says, "Walk with me," leaving little room for refusal, Jude says, "Of course, my heart speeds up despite myself." It's a complete 180 from the first time this had happened, which is in the second book, after the Undersea had come and threatened after the night of the Queen of Mirth. Carden ordered Jude to stay in the room, the council room. When everyone left, she turned to him and threatened him, saying, "Don't ever command me again." Didn't listen to what he was going to say and leaves the room. But when he does something similar towards the end of the second book, she had been frightened of him because she had just been returned from the Undersea. She had been held captive. She is weaker and she was more vulnerable, and she was all of a sudden scared of him. And we're seeing that here too, that she hates that he saw me when I was at my most vulnerable. And this is like seesawing of power between the two of them, and like who has more control and who's wearing that mask of control, when in actuality they're even, that they could stay flat. I love the imagery of, you know, Carden ordering Jude to come with him, and Vivi grabs for her hand and says, "You're not well." And it's kind of saying, like, this is the last chance for you to give all this up and come with us. Come be safe with us. You don't have to take this path. But she lets go. She says, "I let go of my sister," because she's going to choose this option, that she does want to belong in Fairy, that not only that, she wants to rule it alongside Carden. And the beautiful imagery continues when, like, she says, "Carden gives me his arm, causing me to walk at his side instead of behind him the way that I would have as the seneschal." One, it's him showing that she is not only my queen, but we are equals. But, like, bringing her forward, bringing her up into the world as she had always wanted, like, extending a hand that, you know, it's also, like, being like, she was always a puppet king, but now he's kind of bringing her forward into the light. I really like that Carden knows Jude so well to know that her next question after asking about the roach would be about Maddox. So he just jumps to the catch instead of, you know, having a whole song and dance or whatever, or showing that he does know her that well. But he says, "Your father," which I think is a test, because I think a part of him still slightly doubts her, which I think he has every right to do so, because there's enough evidence pointing that she might still be working against him and is using him. So he's, you know, kind of testing to see what she will say. But he continues by saying, like, he blames me for the death of his daughter, which I find interesting because earlier in this book, Maddox had introduced Jude as his foster daughter. But now all of a sudden she is just simply his daughter, and using her death, which he had actually caused, but blaming it on Carden and using it to try to rally the lower courts to, you know, come to his side and fight against Carden. And I like that Carden is kind of telling her all this information, knowing that this would be driving her insane to not know before walking into the Living Council meeting. But also it's kind of like him subtly being like, "So what are we going to do next?" Because I think he knows that she relishes in court politics. That this, even though it's toxic and a part of her hates it, she loves being in the midst of this kind of drama. I also really like that after Jude confronts him, it's like, "We need to have it out." And he's like, "Yeah, we do need to talk." And he leads her outside the palace, kind of like leading her away from the cesspool of, like, court politics hovering over them, that they're not in the midst of the storm, to clear the air, and leads her to the royal rose garden, which roses can symbolize love, but also symbolizes achievement, completion, perfection. And the two of them are kind of clearing the air here. It was also very telling when he says, "It was terrifying watching you fall. I mean, you're generally terrifying, but I'm unused to fearing for you," showing that usually he's afraid of her. And that, then I was furious. I'm not sure I've ever been that angry before. I think is also pointing that there has never been a moment in all these other books and all the other fights and being kidnapped by the Undersea, being kidnapped by Maddox, that he was ever afraid for her life. He just wanted her to be returned to his life. That he figured that either she or he would figure out a way to get her back. But in that moment, he had watched that there was a possibility that she would have died and he would have to continue about her in his life. And not only did that, completely wreck him, but he became angry, more angry than he had been when she was taken by the Undersea. And we watched him seize his power in that moment. But here he is realizing all these people had pushed them to this point and he has had enough, and he's going to seize even more power and control of the situation. And Jude responds with, "Mortals are fragile." And he says, "Not you. You never break." And it's showing that despite him saying in the first book time and time again that you're immortal, that you're breakable, that you're food for worms, he's never truly believed that. I think he's had to say that to try to get him to convince himself, because I think to him, Jude has always been the mythical one. Jude sees Cardan and all these others as mythical, but in actuality, he sees her as mythical because despite everything thrown at her, she stands back up and fights back. And so to him, she's the mythical one, that he never saw her as something that could be ended until that moment. And to reiterate or confirm what I said in the last video, Jude thinks, which is ridiculous. As hurt as I am, I feel like a constellation of runes held together with string and stubbornness, showing that she's not mythical or magical, that is her stubbornness that has kept her getting back up. And then she says, "Still, I like hearing it. I like everything he's saying all too well." And that is her doubt flaring back up. Her wondering, is this too good to be true? Am I about to fall for another trap? And this is the moment I just want to hug Cardan, because he thinks he's so clever that Jude would be proud, because she's like, "That was a trick." And he goes, "Of course there was a trick. Because that's what you do. You trick people. You tricked all these other people, and I thought you would admire me for tricking you," not realizing that of course she would hate that. And I love Cardan's explanation, because it makes sense. He's saying that well, first off, I didn't know in that moment that you had unalived my brother. So yeah, I was a little annoyed, because that's something that the two of them should have figured out, that she went behind his back and did that. And that's harmful, because they do have a very interesting gray relationship, just like her and Maddox. She would probably be mad if Cardan had unalived Maddox. But then he also had very limited time to come up with a scheme to appease everyone. And he thought that she would have been proud that he had figured out something, that she would have figured out his wording. Because remember, chapter 1, not the prologue, but chapter 1 of the second book, he watched her decipher between the words of that hag who was trying to trick Cardan into marrying her daughter. He thought that she would have figured this out. And I love this moment that Jude knows that she should be furious at herself, but she's furious at him. And even though she knows it's irrational, so she storms away, and he grabs her arm and she slaps him. And he looks at her, his eyes bright with something different from anger, because he's attracted because Jude has done things like this, held a dagger to him before. But also I think to him, he's there she is. This quiet, timid version of Jude that has been playing out since she has returned to the Undersea is gone. Now she is slapping him, and that's the version that he wanted back. And then we get the motif again, the "I am in over my head, I am drowning." The drowning motif has shown up time and time and time again since the first book. So many times has it brought up that she feels like she is drowning, that she is drowning, that existing in this world feels like an overwhelming of the senses, drugging of herself, drowning of being in over her head. But also this wording comes up usually in moments of doubt, her wondering, do I really want to be a part of fairy? But to be a part of fairy, in my opinion, you have to fall like Alice falling into Wonderland. You have to be like that human girl who stuffed her pockets and fell off the horse drowning, and the next time we saw her, she was a part of the Undersea. She was a part of this world now, and to be a part of this world, you kind of have to fall into it and drown in it. And then I love this line from Cardan. "No, it's not that. Not exactly. I didn't think I could hurt you, and I never thought you would be afraid of me." One, it's showing their age. They're only 18. They make strange assumptions. But also that both Jude and Cardan had worn their masks too close to their face. Jude never thought he would be capable of having emotions. Remember in the first book, she was surprised by his reaction when his family was unalived. But here it's showing that he never thought she would be capable of being hurt or being afraid, because she had worn that mask too close. And then all of a sudden when they had fallen, the two of them stood shocked to see that they had these other feelings, these other emotions, that they are capable of being hurt and afraid. And Jude responds with, and did you like it? He looks away from me and I have my answer, which is to say that he did like it, but you know what, Jude did too. In the first book, when his mask fell and she saw him with his emotions, like he was afraid of her, she loved it. But with both of them, because they didn't think that either of them would be capable of making the other afraid because of every moment leading up to it, it looked like they couldn't. But after that initial reaction of, haha, I like it, but then they realize, I don't like it. I don't want her to be afraid of me because I do care for her. I want to be close, just as Jude doesn't want him to be really afraid of her. I kind of love the mirroring of Jude admitting that, yeah, I have been afraid of you. I've always been afraid and scared of you. It's similar to Cardan admitting that in the first book. It's just it took Jude a little bit longer to finally remove that mask. Cardan removed it at, midpoint in the first book, and we see him then kind of leave that mask off around Jude, trying to get closer to her, whereas Jude kept that mask on and tried to keep their distance until this moment. But her also saying that, like, you threw the world upside down, but then you saying to me, exile made sense. That was a right side up Cardan move. That both of them surprise each other. You literally see Cardan's expression, surprised by her words here, that he didn't expect that, just as he didn't expect her kissing him in the first book. But the upside down and right side up is, I think, a homage to Alice in Wonderland, through the looking glass, that part of the book. I love this moment of Cardan admitting, like, you took all my flaws, all the things that I kind of hated about myself, of, frightening people, charming them, and made them talents. You made them positive, just as Jude had taken her flaws and made them into talents. Jude thinking, it's a strange speech and there's little love in it, but it doesn't seem like a trick either. It's showing that Cardan knows her well enough to know that he could, tell her in so many beautiful flowery words of how much he loves her, but she would laugh him off. She has done it in the past, wouldn't believe him. That he knows that in order for her to believe him, he kind of has to strip his words to the bare minimum and almost be practical for her to then truly see it as it is and not think it's a trick. I also really enjoy, I have nothing to say about it, but I really enjoy this moment of, like, the mom coming and being like, you should leave. And he's like, this is my room and this is my wife. And the mom being like, yeah, you keep saying that. But then, like, her being like, but you should leave. I'm going to take the stitches out. And Jude saying, I don't know, maybe he would like to hear me scream. And he says, I would. And perhaps one day I will. Like the innuendo. I hate it, but I kind of like this moment with Lady Asha of her, like, kind of requesting Jude's presence, even though Jude is the queen of Elfheim, because, like, one, it's showing that Jude is still uncomfortable with her position. Even though this is something that she aspired to having, she still believes herself beneath fairies, even though she wouldn't say it outwardly. Inwardly, she has internalized this belief thanks to her upbringing. I kind of like that in between being requested to go visit Lady Asha and going to see her, she runs into Valmorin, the mortal seneschal, and he is furious. And it's kind of showing that he is heavily involved in this court politics system, that even though he may not outwardly look like he is, he is. He's very much like Littlefinger and Varys in Game of Thrones. He reminds me a lot of them, where, like, he's almost blends and gets lost in the background, but he is heavily involved and heavily concerned about his placement in this court. And then he throws in her face, wouldn't you be, aren't you not to be kind to the least of your subjects, waving his mortality in front of her. But he literally said to her in the second book that he had killed off his mortality in order to exist in this world beside the High King, that he doesn't see himself as mortal anymore, but now he's waving in her face because it might improve his position in this court. But I love that Jade throws back into his face, no, why would I help you when you never helped me and my sister when we first came here? This line, her horns don't look as though they make it easy for her to find a comfortable position, but I guess when they're your horns, you're used to them. And it's interesting because the other person who's known for wearing horns is Jude. However, she hasn't really since she's returned from the Undersea. And since she's been returned from the Undersea, she's been in this, like, dilemma of who is she? And we've seen this other version of herself, but only recently we're starting to see her be strong as she was in the first book. Not that she wasn't strong in all these other books, but she wasn't the same kind of version as strong as she was in the first book and the first half of the second book. But now she's not wearing horns. Now, I think the horns were done to make her look a little bit more like a fairy, that a lot of the fairies have these strange features to them. But now she's not doing it because she's trying to show, like, yes, I am mortal, but I have been accepted in this world. I'm not going to try to pretend I'm someone I'm not, which then kind of goes into, I guess, when they're your horns, or you're used to it. She wasn't used to this mask that she had been wearing, trying to pretend to be something that she's not. And it's also interesting that Cardan's mother has horns when he's been attracted to Jude, and all the girls that he's been hooking up with has had horns too. Now, since Holly Black is giving us specifically what Lady Asha's room smells like, I looked up the symbolism. Sage smell is wisdom, clove is luck, and lavender is purity and devotion and silence. And I think that last one was the most interesting. The mirroring, oh my god. So she notes that the courtiers remain far longer than they should have, and they like make their bows but with a pointed lethargy. Lady Asha stays in bed, gazing at me with a slight smile, so we both know a distasteful secret. There have been a few moments in the early books where we see Cardan like this, but the first one that comes to mind is in the second book, where she enters his room and like Locke is there and these other girls, and Jude has to order them out, but it takes Cardan to order them, be like, no, actually leave, and he's still lounging and smirking. It's also important that Jude changes from calling her Lady Asha to Cardan's mother says, after her being disrespectful. Like, she has to remind herself that, remember, this is Cardan's mother, which is also going to influence how she interacts with her because of the strangeness of her interaction with his brother. The other interesting thing is the way that Lady Asha is talking to Jude is very similar to Balkan, that they're assuming that Jude loves Cardan and that it is going to be her downfall, that Cardan's feelings will evaporate like the morning dew, whereas Cardan's feelings have been steadfast for the longest point, and that he actually loves her first and more at some point. So it's just like they're assuming because he is fairy that they float on the whim, like how Locke describes his feelings with Heron, but we're seeing that's not the case. This interaction in the beginning of chapter 20 with Fan is very interesting for a couple different reasons. One is that someone that she had known from childhood, someone that she had taken class with, and she notes that they were not friends, but they were friendly. And it's interesting because in book one, we really didn't get the impression that there were many fairies that were friendly towards them. That the way that Jude had presented the world to us in book one was almost black and white, that either they were accepted by the fairies or they were ignored or diminished or abused. And yet we're seeing that that was not the case, but she didn't tell us that in the beginning. But also Fan is someone that they got along because they both aspired to be knights, and I think Fan is a representation of who Jude could have been if Maddox had allowed her to be a knight. She probably would have had Fan's job running for someone else, but yet here's Jude, not as a knight, but the queen of Elfhame. I like this slight development, and it's subtle, so you may not notice it, but this is not the first time a guard has come up to Jude and said that, like, the Undersea desired her presence. Well, like, in the last book, it was Jude and Cardan, more so Cardan, but in the last book, they had left the safety of their court and gone to them. They had gone to the edge between the land and the sea to have this conversation. You know, while it almost had equal power, but it felt more like the Undersea had more of the power in the situation. And it happened twice in the second book when like they got Jude back, but also that interaction when he exiled Jude. But here it seems like they're a little bit more afraid of Cardan's power and even Jude's wiles, because they're coming to them. They're coming to their court where they will have kind of like home turf like advantage. I didn't even catch this till this moment when Fan says you ought to have your own guard, and Jude thinks everyone seems fond of telling me how I should do this job. And I'm like thinking, you know, it's just her power dynamics, having control of the situation, at least looking like she has control of the situation. But it just hit me right now. It's a mirroring of the last book. She said something nearly identical to Cardan. I think it's interesting that of all the undersea creatures to come, it's only the Selkies and the drowned ones. Now, it might be only because they're the only ones that can come up on land. But like, you know, Selkies, for instance, shed their skin, their seal skins, and change into human forms to come up on land. And I think that's fascinating because both Jude and Cardan metaphorically shed their skins throughout the process of these 3 books to transform into these stronger, more confident people and acknowledge their fears and their flaws more so than they had in the first book. But also, like, Cardan literally sheds his skin when he changes back from snake to fae. But also the drowned ones I think are interesting because if we were to believe that Jude did see that human girl with them back in the first book, it wasn't just her imagination, then she's calling them folk, but it seems like they might have been humans that they kind of turned into folks like zombie-like. And I think it's one to show the motif of you need to kind of drown, you kind of need to die to be able to exist in this world. And like, this is how these humans did. And I think it's a message to Jude. What an interesting image Narcia is painting right here, because when Jude walks into the throne room, first off, Cardan's already there, and I think that's putting them already on the back foot, that they would have had a stronger front if Cardan and Jude had walked in together. It would have solidified Jude's place as a queen a little bit more, and right now she's on rocky terms, as we saw that only half the people that they passed had bowed. But Narcia is standing there in armor, and she's wearing shark teeth in her hair, and that is just, you know, painting this image of strength and like fight and like, I don't know, like rigidity, but like her eyes are red rimmed and swollen, showing that she's been crying. And I think it perfectly represents her personality, that she has this like strong, tough exterior, but she's such a softie and like so easily hurt like on the inside. You know, we've seen this a couple times throughout the 3 books, but it also kind of almost seems like she's trying to mirror the 2 approaches that Jude and Taryn have taken, the strength approach of Jude, but the, you know, manipulation with Tyr approach that Taryn and Arenia would use typically. It's really interesting that this is Jude's first moment truly as the High Queen of Elfhame, to establish herself, her first political, you know, exchange. And the first thing out of her mouth besides what, you know, is, "I'm so sorry," to Narcia. And she acknowledges that it's utterly human thing to say, that her first move, her first step as the queen, she does something very human. Okay, so this paragraph felt a little random, like it didn't need to be there, where she says, "Once Narcia and her mother held me captive, locked me in a cage, and tried to take my will from me. Sometimes in my dreams, I am still there, still floating in the dark and the cold." But I think there's meaning to it. I think there's more to it that I just can't quite grasp yet. But the first thing that comes to mind is Maddox. That Maddox had tried to take her will away from her, tried to use her for his benefit, like a puppet. And we saw earlier in this book, he had left her in the dark, in the middle of the night, in the cold, in the snow, dying thanks to his hand. And I think in both cases, we watched her almost die and be reborn from these moments. These were 2 low moments in her life, but like, I think there's more to it. I think it also was like representation of this world. I don't know, but I think the dying part could be interesting because of what I said earlier of like how you kind of need to drown, you need to die to then exist in this world. I think this one line from Narcia shows that she still is not acknowledging who Cardan and Jude are now, that she's seen them as who they were, not seeing the power that they have now, not seeing them as the king and queen, when she says, "I count on you to avenge my mother if nothing else." But why? Cardan has no reason to. Previously, your mother had threatened Cardan. Your mother had kidnapped Jude, and I don't believe you had sworn your fealty to him, so you're technically not one of the minor courts under his umbrella of protection, so why should he seek revenge for you? I stated earlier in this chapter that Cardan already being in the throne room and Jude coming later would put her on a back foot, both of them, because if they had come in together, it would, you know, strengthen their force and show that she is really the queen. They have equal power. But because he was already there and interacting with Narcia, we're seeing that the repercussions of that. We're seeing Radalan, you know, scoffing at Jude's questions and, you know, talking solely to Cardan. And to continue, the interesting thing is that Cardan has grown more confident because he responds immediately and says, yes, I suppose we should. I actually had expected him to turn to Jude to bring her into this conversation, to have her answer for him, as he probably would have done prior to her being taken to the Undersea, prior to her being exiled. Because of those 2 events, he has been forced to take on his role and he's grown more confident. But like, it's interesting that it doesn't throw Jude through a loop, because I think if this had happened in the last book, she would have prickled at it, thinking that he wouldn't give up the throne for Oak. It's interesting that both Jude and Cardan have had to now, in this book, go to their childhood homes where they have had strange upbringings, I guess, like gray, like it's good and bad. And like, so obviously these mixed emotions are really running through them when they've had to reapproach these homes to kind of almost face their old selves. And if they truly have grown, or, you know, you kind of fall back into who you were. I think it's interesting that both Jude and Cardan have a physical reminder of like the darker side of this world and of like their upbringing, that, you know, they're not the only ones with emotional and mental scars. You know, Narcia, Locke, and Taryn also have these from their upbringing and existing in this world. But they can forget it easily, unlike Cardan and Jude, because they have a physical reminder that does not allow them to forget it. Cardan has been whipped, and I believe in the first book Jude points out that he actually has scars on his back, and Jude is currently rubbing over the stub of her missing finger. It is impossible for them to completely forget about this darker side of this world, and I think it will help them to want to make it better, that they will never forget what it can be, what the worst of it can be. I kind of love this moment where the ghost is charging at them, because Jude acts on instinct and falls into her old ways of acting on by herself and using herself, only she can depend on herself to protect others, whereas Cardan calls for help. He calls for the guards and then pulls a dagger out of his doublet, showing that he not only can fight for himself, but he can protect Jude too. And it's so interesting that in this chapter we're seeing Cardan at a high, that he is commanding, that he is in control, that he is self-assured, that he is capable of fighting a little bit, or at least looking like he can. And yeah, we're going to see him fall a little bit in the next couple of chapters when he gets turned into a snake, leaving Jude alone. And Jude reacting this way is a great thing, because she still has a little bit more growing to do. I just love this line from Cardan where he says, "Unlike Locke, I never thought love was a game. You may accuse me of much, but not that." And he's saying, like, yes, we were friends and we might have enjoyed similar jokes to a point, but I never joked about love. And we see in his novella how heartbroken he was when Locke had lured away Narcia, and all for just a lark, just to see if he can. And he does it again with the twins. And it's really interesting because the two of them are similar. They both grew up without familiar love, technically, but yet Locke had turned finding love into a game, whereas Cardan was just desirous to have it in any way, and if he had it, he would have done anything to keep it. I love this little throwaway moment in the carriage where Cardan is trying to convince Tara not to hate him, but he's asking her questions about the mortal world because I think he truly is desirous to learn and to see Jude as a whole, because he doesn't want to just love the Alfheim version of Jude. He wants to love the whole version of Jude, and to kind of show that you don't have to hide that part of yourself. Oh, what an interesting line from Terrence. She says, he wants you to like him, but just because he wants you doesn't mean you should. Now, I think she's more so talking to herself, talking about her own mistakes, and it makes sense because on paper, Cardan and Locke seem alike, that this would be a similar mistake Jude could be making. But in actuality, Cardan's the better of the two. Now, once again, if Holly Black is going to tell me something specific, I'm going to look up the symbolism. So Jude puts on one of Cardan's ruffly shirts and climbs into the High King's bed and pulls up the coverlet embroidered with hunting stag. Now, in Celtic tradition, hunting stags represent the pursuit of wisdom, whereas in Native American, it is representing of leadership. And in both cases, it's interesting after the rest of this chapter where I pointed out that it seems like Jude is almost fumbling a little bit as the High Queen. She hasn't quite grasped it. She keeps accidentally falling into mortal ways. And I think it's interesting also that she puts on one of Cardan's shirts and climbs into the High King's bed, almost like she's trying to outfit herself to be like a fairy. Honestly, I think Fand is a perfect guard for Jude, because not only is this someone that she knows and that they were friendly together in school that we learned in the last chapter, so she can kind of trust her. And she knows her capabilities, having trained with her. But also, I like that Fand has no problems kind of talking back to her, but politely being kind of right now we're seeing her almost saying, "I told you so, but you should hire me." She is bold enough to be "You should hire me as your personal guard." Also, once again, we're getting another clue that Fand is supposed to be a representation of who Jude could have been if Maddox had allowed her to become a knight. Because she says, "I recall my own longing for a place in the royal household, to be chosen as part of the personal guard of one of the princesses. I also understand why she wouldn't have been likely to be picked. She's young and, all evidence suggests, outspoken," mirroring Jude. So this could have been Jude's life if Maddox hadn't stopped her. But because Maddox did, she took a different path, which led her to being the queen. This small detail is interesting to me, where Jude says that she purchased her on the arm of the opposite sofa from the counselor, whereas Carter would have just thrown himself across it, lounged it, claimed the entire sofa. Jude purchased on the arm, almost as if she doesn't even want to allow herself to sit on it. It's not her couch. It's not her room. She hasn't fully claimed her space yet. But also, it's almost what she would have done if she was a seneschal. She would have perched on the arm of the couch, giving little space on the couch, but also ready to jump up and act. Randolin's approach to Jude is interesting because he was saying that you're a good seneschal and you care about elfing, but we want you to relinquish your current title. And I think Jude unknowingly is very good at making a bargain deal, and she doesn't realize that she had overstepped so far that they're now like, you know what, seneschal's not that bad anymore. Whereas when she was a seneschal, they're like, you're overstepping as a mortal. But now that she's a high queen, they're like, you know what, that's not bad. But the interesting thing is that he's pretty much saying that you're good at ruling, but we want you to relinquish the title of high queen because it offends us personally, because you're immortal. So I want you to do all the work of a high queen, just without the title of the high queen. I like that Cardan once again is the one to feed her. We saw that in the last book, that when she broke through the ceiling after being taken by the undersea, he's the one to call for food for her. And he's doing it here. He brought her food, and it's almost as if he is there to help remind her of her mortality, but not in a mean way. That Jude is trying to suppress her mortality, the fact that she gets hungry and stuff like that, that she's not like the Fae. She's trying to pretend to be like the Fae, especially now because she is fumbling. She's still trying to figure herself out, especially with this new role. And he is there to remind her that you don't have to be like us. You don't have to forget certain aspects of your body to pretend to be like us. God, Cardan is so brilliant. I love him saying, why don't you tell me what you were discussing? I have no doubt you prefer Jude's level-headed answers to my nonsense, but it amuses me to hear the matters of state nonetheless. And it's him steadily saying, without actually saying, I overheard you trying to convince Jude to relinquish her title, and you're an idiot for doing so. She is the better person to address these kind of issues with. She has better answers. I might make some smart decisions every now and then, but it's by accident. And we notice also in the last chapter, Randolin turned to Cardan for answers for certain situations, not Jude. Now, Cardan is also kind of not realizing that he is as smart as he is. I think he diminishes himself a little bit because he definitely is very clever in other aspects that Jude isn't, and together they are a force. Also, I love that we don't see Cardan turn to anger very often. It's very rare occurrence. And it's interesting that one of the moments that it's going to have him fuming is regarding Jude and her safety and her proximity to him, that Randolin's trying to scare her away, and he just got her back and he doesn't notice it, and Jude's noticing it though. She's like, I should probably warn Randolin that he ought to be afraid of the way that Cardan's looking at him. Cardan turns to me and some of the heat of his anger is still in his eyes. Now, Cardan knows that Jude can defend herself, and he acknowledges it here, and he respects it and loves it, and he doesn't try to stop her in any other time, but he also recognizes that in this society and the way that this world is set up, that the Fae will always continue to, diminish and abuse Jude because of her mortality, and they will only stop when he steps in, because he is Fae, probably because he's male, and because of his position of power. And, for instance, Jude wouldn't have reached any position of power in this world without some Fae helping to prop her up. So there's like a slight uneven balance, but I think he at least doesn't try to abuse it. He wants to fix this, but I think at the same time, he kind of likes that she kind of needs him. How interesting that Jude wears a gold dress now. Now, when she was pretending to be Terran, she had worn a bronze, which also very much was armor-like, and yet here she's wearing a gold column dress with gilded chainmail. And I think it's interesting because a little bit later, we're going to see her in golden armor when she faces off Snake Cardan. Meanwhile, Cardan is wearing a midnight blue outfit embroidered with beetles, and I looked up the symbolism of beetles and how fitting that it represents good luck, rebirth, transformation, teamwork, and adaptability. Now, midnight blue, which is what Cardan is wearing, also is often worn by royalty because it symbolizes confidence and power, and it's fitting for him to wear that as he walks in arm in arm with Jude. That he is, yes, the royal blood. He is bringing this confidence and power with him, and she is in gold chainmail. She is his sword to his, words, that they are a force, and I like that they're going arm in arm, presenting themselves together as a high king and queen, so everyone is forced to acknowledge the power and strength of them together. So Heather and Vivi walk in, and Heather is wearing a ivory dress, and it's showing this innocence to her. That's usually what the color associates with, whereas Vivi is wearing this dried blood red, commonly associated with Maddox, as Jude thinks, and this is why Jude rushes over, because I think when she looks at them, she is seeing almost history repeating itself in her, at least she fears history might repeat herself with, you know, Maddox and their mother. Heather's comment here is interesting to me, where she says, there are things people shouldn't get a taste for. I guess magic is like that. Making it sound very drug-like, which is something I have mentioned throughout the other books, that the world of fairy is very drug-like. It muddles your senses. There's so much weird, strange, over-the-top sights and smells and tastes that it's almost drug-like. And I've also talked about how you kind of have to drug yourself to enter this world. Like, Jude literally poisons herself in order to be accepted into this world, to work for Dane. So it's interesting that Heather is kind of saying something similar to that here. I love Carden's speech here. It's one of my favorites, where he says, be welcome on the Isle of Innsmire, seelie and unseelie, wild folk and shy folk. I am glad to have you march under my banner, glad of your loyalty, grateful for your honor. To you I offer honey wine and the hospitality of my table, but to traitors and oath breakers I offer you my queen's hospitality instead, the hospitality of knives. And it's a subtle threat and also a show of, yeah, you might think that I'm the one in power, but my queen will be the one to stab you if you try to betray us. But in addition to that, it's brilliant on Carden's part, because while it makes her seem like a murderous queen, it forces them to respect her finally, because she knows that when she leaves the party, all the courtiers bow this time, not just part of them or some of them or half of them. Carden had reminded them that she had killed Balkan, a prince of Alfheim, that a mortal had done that, so don't try to cross her. So when they get back to the room, you know, Carden's complimenting her for being a formidable queen, and Jude's tired and then says, you didn't come to bed last night, and he responds with, I'm here now. Now, it's ambiguous enough that you can interpret it a couple different ways, but the way that I'm going to interpret it is that he was giving her space and letting her set the pace. That he was afraid that if he pushed too hard too soon, she will push him away, because she has done that in the past. That, you know, on the night they had wedded for an alliance. That was it. That when they went to bed, they did share a bed, but nothing had happened. Nothing has happened since behind the throne room. And so he just got her back. She was tired. She was injured, and he didn't want to show up in the room and make her feel, you know, pressured or, you know, scare her away. So he was giving her space, but he is there tonight because I think a sign that she might accept him was her bringing her clothes and belonging to this room. And yeah, I also like that the way that she's describing kissing Carden right now, this really heated moment that I'm loving, is that her thoughts feel more drugged, that her skin is flushed, that she feels overheated and out of control, which is similar symptoms of when she was poisoning herself. Also, I just love how attuned Carden is to instantly notice when she freezes and then backs away and goes, we need not. Like, sir. This line, naked, there is no disguise for my mortality, which is showing that she has been putting on all these clothes, putting on all these costumes, trying to pretend to be like a fairy. But when you strip her down, you can't hide the fact that she is mortal. And yet here with Carden, she is willing to strip down and expose that part of herself that she has been constantly trying to hide for years. I love then Carden comes down to her level. He doesn't stand hovering above her anymore, but yet he cages her. But then he says, mock me all you like. Whatever I imagined then, now it is I who would beg and grovel for a kind word from your lips. By you I am forever undone. And with that, he's putting the power back in her hands. Wait, the Mockingbird I love because it's a mirror of something that happened in the second book, but like the reverse of it. So it's like Alice through the Looking Glass. But in the second book in The Wicked King, when Carden proposed marriage, she accused him of mocking her, and he's like, I'm not mocking you. And here, when they're about to have sex, he says, you mock me all you like, and she says, I'm not mocking you. And it's their way of saying I'm serious without actually saying that, because the way that they actually believe that the other person is serious and the way that they communicate is through like sarcasm and jokes. I also think that when Jude knows that we are still lying on the floor, although a perfectly good bed is right next to us, Jude has always seen the bed as a connotation of the High King. She's time and time again since the second book have called it the High King's bed. And I think the fact that they had this moment the first time having sex together and that they're lying there on the floor is to show that it's just Jude and Carden doing this. It's not the High King and Queen. It's nothing to do with the fact that they got married for the title, kind of as she assumed in the beginning. This moment between them is between them. Okay, so I had previously tried to answer this question, and we had, went back and forth trying to figure out what chapter she was talking about specifically, and she thought it was chapter 21 in The Queen of Nothing, and I reread it, and I didn't quite understand because I didn't quite quite make sense. But I tried answering it the best I could, but that was like chapters ago. I'd finally reached chapter 20, the end of it, and I think I found the scene that she's talking about. And she's talking about how, you know, this is after they had come across the ghost, and, you know, the undersea saying that the queen has been shot at, it's potentially dying. There's this whole day of things, and she's tired and, you know, gone back and put on Cardan's shirt. She gets in the High King's bed, pulls up the blankets, and she says that she's fell asleep waiting for the sound of the door opening, for his steps on the wooden floor. But when I wake, I am still alone. No lamps lit, no pillows moved, nothing changed. I sit upright. He hadn't come in the middle of the night. However, I think she assumed, like, at the rest of the paragraph is her saying that she assumes he's still in court with partying with the rest of the group, probably. However, based off the rest of chapter 20, the context of it, it is, in my opinion, safe to assume that he had actually been down in Court of Shadows, not playing darts with the ghost, but probably interrogating the ghost for any information regarding Maddox and, you know, the camp. And I think any information he gains from the ghost is going to influence his future decision about breaking the crown. So I think that's why he didn't come to bed, was that he was up scheming and running this kingdom as he has been doing since Jude has been in the undersea and since Jude has been in exile. He didn't avoid her bed because he was avoiding her. He avoided her bed. I don't think he was avoiding her bed. He was busy. He was busy trying to figure out how to save her, how to prevent Maddox from taking her away again, from someone attempting to kill her, because he just watched her nearly die falling from the rafters. He will do whatever it takes. He will, you know, not sleep if it means keeping Jude and also, in addition, the rest of the kingdom safe. So I think that is why he did not come to bed. But because we're in Jude's POV, and she normally assumes the worst, as Cardan points out earlier in this chapter, that Jude assumes the worst from both her enemies and her allies. She assumes him to act in his old ways, not seeing throughout this chapter all the growth that he has undergone, the confidence he has when interacting with the rest of the council, the command he has in the room, that they turn to him for answers, the way that he called guards and pulled out a dagger when the ghosts looked to attack them. She still sees the old version of Cardan, which I think is interesting after early in this chapter seeing how Narcia still sees them as their old versions, not as the High King and Queen. So I hope that is a better answer for this question than my last video. But yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to try to explain what I personally think is Maddox's scheme and the reasoning behind it based off the information we have leading up to chapter 22 in the third book and whatever I can recall from the last time I read this book. Now, I think he called for the lower courts to go to Cardan because, one, he knew that he couldn't sneak attack them, that the moment that he broke away, the court of Elfhame has been waiting for him to attack, knowing Maddox's personality and his history. And so he had to think of a different way. He had to be a little bit clever. And I think he also wanted to prove that he can conquer without, you know, bloodshed, to be cleverer, to prove himself in a different way. And so he figured, as he told Jude, I would challenge him to a duel. And the best way then to sway others was then to have the lower courts all there to watch Maddox defeat this boy, as he called him. But also he knew that it would be pointless to just attack them outright because the numbers were against him, and also the power. Like, Cardan literally has the power of Elfhame. But if you kind of challenge him to a duel, you might be able to, like, hinder him or set the rules that he can't use that power, which then would give Maddox the advantage. So I think that is why he is doing this, at least based off the information I have so far. Oh, Cardan, like, this goes over Jude's head too, because he says, like, no, we're here, Maddox out, but we'll have all of our arrows pointed at him and we must strike back with all the force we possess. He looks at the floor, then up at me, and Jude doesn't realize that he's afraid to look at her because this is her father figure, and the most likely outcome is that he's going to end up dead. And he's afraid of what she's thinking, afraid that this might cause a rift between the two of them. Because, like, with Balkan was his father figure. He was the one that raised him. It was a great relationship, but he never wished for Balkan to end up dead. And Jude never took that into consideration, really. Like, briefly, kind of, but not as much as Cardan is here, I feel like. And we see with Jude, like, she forgave Maddox the last time, and in the future we're going to see that she has in her right to execute him for his actions, but she just banishes him to the mortal world. Cardan's right when he says, no, I would look like a coward if I don't hear him out. And Jude thinks, with those words my heart sing, because pride is exactly what Maddox hopes to manipulate. But that's not the thing. Cardan knows that in this world, your power is kind of helps dictate your position on the hierarchy. That if he didn't hear him out, he would look like a coward, and why would any of these people follow him now? And then they would take it as a reason to push him, to topple him over. Others might try to top him over and take the seat of power. You have to show your force. That is how this hierarchy works. That's why, red caps are higher up on the hierarchy, because of their bloodlust and force. By the way, the three pieces that follow is juggling is a knight, which is Jude, a sword, which is Maddox, and a crown, which is Cardan. The three power players that are at the vortex of what is going on right now. Now, it was smart of Maddox to travel by sea, because even before he weakened Orla, the sea already has an interesting relationship with the land. Like, they would seize the opportunity into them. They would think that, let these two battle it out, it would weaken them, and then we'll seize the land for ourselves. And it's also safer for Maddox because we already have seen that Cardan has full control over the land. He has full power of Elfhame. Elfhame's kind of sentient, and he literally raised an island, so it's safer for him to go by sea. I love Cardan, and it's really showing how much he has grown, and that Jude, she's not quite there yet, she's still growing, but this entire time, Jude has not thought about the potential outcome for Maddox and the fact that he was her father figure. She has compartmentalized it so severely that we have not seen her actually think about her feelings about that. And yet, Cardan slips his fingers into hers and says, it's hard to work against someone you love. Pretty much saying, you can think about it. And, I would understand. I think he's the only person who would truly understand what she would be going through. And I think he's also saying, don't put up this wall. It's okay to feel these things. We don't have to compartmentalize again, because that is what the two of them used to do way back in the beginning. As someone who loves costuming and sees the power of in symbolism of outfits, I adore the ones in House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones, they're perfection. But here, if you walked into this court and looked at Jude, she would look like the High Queen of Elfhame. You would have no doubt in your mind. She is dressed in a gown of green and gold, which I believe is the colors of Elfhame we've seen a few times. She has a circlet of gilded branches, which is similar enough without being identical to Cardan's crown of Elfhame, which is oak leaves. And her hair is braided and shaped into ram horns, which, this family, Cardan's siblings have animalistic or nature traits. So Balkan had the horns in his arms, Dane had hooves, Cardan has a tail. This makes her look like she is like one of them, but we know that she's not. But she at least has the appearance that she is like this mythical fae. And then also she has her lips stained the color of berries in winter. Now, the color in my mind could potentially look a little bit like dried blood, which would be interesting after Maddox had just tried to unalive her, and this is their first interaction. But also winter, which is the end, the death of something. This is the end of their journey before Cardan and Jude's rebirth after the whole snake incident. Now, I love that they're matching about actually matching, they're both wearing green, but Jude's is a green and gold. In my head, I imagine it being bright, you're gonna hone in on her first, whereas Cardan's green is a mossy dark that is nearly black like his curls. And in my head, I think it's because his green is almost decaying. We are watching him almost coming out of his power before he gets turned into a snake, which is a black snake, whereas Jude is right now about to enter the height of her power again before the rebirth of both of them. I just had this interesting thought. So she talks about how she has Oak, Taryn, Vivian, Heather hidden in the same area where her and Taryn used to watch court. So they would be in this world, but not a part of this world. They'd be watching from up above. And it's interesting that Jude has them there now, almost preventing them from being a part of this world, just as Maddox had preventing them. Yes, Maddox had brought them into this world, but he didn't allow them to be a part of this world. And Jude's kind of doing that right now too. She's doing it to keep them safe, but it's interesting that her and Maddox overlap so often. I hate that sometimes I know that there's a symbolism in a moment, but my brain just doesn't want to decipher it. So when Oak hands Jude back her ring that she had given to Oak to safekeep, it was originally Jude's ring, but Cardan had, stolen it off her finger unknowing to her and used it to propose marriage. And then Jude gave it to Oak in the beginning of this book to keep safe when she was pretending to be Taryn. I know there's some symbolism here. I just can't figure it out for the life of me right now. I'm like, I can't believe I'm actually tearing up reading Cardan. Like, he has a way of words because he says, it's you I love. I've spent much of my life guarding my heart. I guarded it so well that I could behave as though I didn't have one at all. Even now, it is a shabby, worm-eaten, and scabious thing, but it is yours. Like, sir. And then, like, walks away, but then he turns around and he goes, you probably guessed as much, but just in case you didn't. But, like, in that moment, it's such a Cardan way of declaring his love. Like, he says, like, I love you, but then he does, like, a self-deprecating kind of comment about his heart being worm-eaten, and then just leaves before she can respond. Like, he's a little afraid of what she might say. Like, ugh, Cardan. Once again, I love that Jude makes wrong assumptions because it feels so natural, so human. Like, you're working off only the information you have been provided. So when she looks at Cardan, he gives her a preoccupied smile as though his thoughts are on Maddox in the coming conflict. But that's not the case, as we will learn in the next couple of pages. He is actually thinking about breaking the crown, his scheme. He probably has come up with a scheme a while ago and has been formulating and weighing the pros and cons of actually doing it. And in this moment, he's probably thinking, should I actually follow through with this plan? Like, having the last minute doubts. Once again, we're seeing Maddox's internal bias underestimating Jude. He assumes because she is mortal, she can only go so high. He is setting a ceiling for her, even though she continues to prove that she can go higher. And he's like, so even though he has said that I will not underestimate you, he continues to underestimate her. But the other thing is that he says, and I, a fool, to wonder if you were even still alive. You did not wonder because you were waving around the fact that she was dead and blamed it on Cardan not that long ago. And the other thing is that I think the real conflict between all three books has been between Jude and Maddox. This father-daughter battle of allowing her to be her own person, to be an adult, but then underestimating her and thinking her a child and, smothering her. And we see this power play now going on a grander scale of, court politics and the rest of their family having to choose sides. And we watch them kind of go back and forth until they all eventually end up on Jude's. I just figured out Maddox's plan. Thank God Cardan doesn't go in this direction, but he's offering Cardan this sword, knowing he's not a swordsman, and just exhibiting this grand power it has. But we and Jude knows that Grimson likes to put a little fail-safe in all his creations, something that will backfire on the holder, and that would be Maddox's plan. That Cardan would be prideful, be yearning, a starving man at a feast, whatever he said, that he would want that sword, knowing that he is not skilled enough and craving more like a child. And then when they go to duel, it would backfire on him and Maddox would win. Okay, I kind of had to go to Maddox because all his insults and everything that his goading and everything he is saying and being like, if Queen Orla dies, it's your fault by not agreeing to this. It's so brilliant and targeted at Cardan, and having seen him throughout the years, having watched him grow up, but yet he misses this other aspect of Cardan that we and Jude have gotten to witness over these books. And that's why Cardan doesn't fall for these anymore. And I think in part because of his time with Jude and him growing over the last two books. Actually, now I'm starting to think that Cardan didn't walk in planning to break the crown. I think he was planning some scheme in his head, some way of maneuvering around, kind of like how he did with the Undersea. But once again, we see him kind of react on like an impulse thought and it backfiring a little bit, like how he did with the exiling of Jude. But here he sees the throne broken, and with the reminder of the prophecy thanks to Maddox, he is taking it literally, thinking it is giving him the go-ahead to break the crown, and then it turns him into a snake. I do like the fairy tale like essence of Cardan turning into a snake and Jude having to break this curse, because there's so many fairy tales where this is the main plot. Like, I do know that Holly Black, because she's talked about it in interviews, she really likes the white cat story where like this very dumb prince has to go through these challenges thanks to his father, and it involves this like white cat. At the end she convinces him to unalive her, but she turns into a princess, and like we know Beauty and the Beast, and there are so many others. In the last chapter, I talked about how Jude can defend herself, but unfortunately, because of how this society is set up, they will always diminish and abuse Jude unless some fae step in and help her, where Cardan stepped in and defended her against Randolin, where Dane helped prop her up. Like, she would never have risen in power without Dane or Cardan helping her to do so. And we see it again here. She declares herself as the Queen of Elfhame, but they only listen once Randolin supports her. We're getting our first glimpse at Oak's personality later to happen in like the Stolen Heir, that he is willing and brave enough to throw himself in danger if it means protecting those he loves. What an interesting predicament being Queen of Elfhame has presented itself for Jude, where it's, you know, protecting the realm against those she loves. She walked into this court thinking that most likely she might have to accept that her father figure will end up dead, but it ends with her most likely having to kill the person she loves. I love that in this moment, Jude's not thinking about how am I going to retain this power? How am I going to defend it against Maddox? What am I going to do about these couriers? How am I going to protect my family? No, she's thinking about Cardan and those black eyes now trapped in a snake form, but also his final words to her of how he has spent much of his life guarding his heart, but it is hers. And then right after she's thinking about Cardan's final words about his heart being warm eaten, but it's hers, she also then thinks of how she has one hand pressing against my chest as though I am trying to keep my heart from beating through the cage of my ribs. It's as if her heart is trying to seek out his. That is how much she loves him. She will not say it outright, but you can tell from that. And even like things like, my dress is too heavy, I can't breathe. The like dress is a symbolism of like her as the High Queen of Elfhame, her new position, and it's weighing down on her because now the thing that she had always kind of wanted, which was more power, she doesn't want anymore because the thing that she wants is now turned into a snake. Just like with Fond, Grima Mog is a great person to have at Jude's side because she not only is giving Jude the respect that she is due, but she is outspoken enough to like remind her like, no, you don't go searching for the royal astrologer. You command for him to come to you. That is who you are now. And I like these gentle reminders that these two do without belittling her or, you know, bringing her down a few notches, not treating her in the proper respect that she is due. But I also like that Grima Mog is giving her advice that's very similar to what Maddox would have given if he wasn't thinking about only himself. She's telling her that you need to keep your boot on their throat because they might kill you to seize power. And this is something Maddox would have told her also if he wasn't someone that was seizing power himself. So I think Grima Mog is such a great replacement for Jude, someone that is giving her similar advice that she had grown up with, but is helping to support her. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know I'm obsessed with the motif of drowning because it's come up time and time again since the very first book. And to me, I think it represents how you become a part of fairy. To be a part of this world, you kind of need to drown into it. You need to poison yourself to be a part of it. You need to die almost. You need to be like Alice falling through into Wonderland. And I'm saying this here because there's a line that she says, my head is swimming. And you can kind of imagine her kind of treading water, keeping her head above, that she isn't fully immersing herself into the world of fairy, allowing herself to be the High Queen of Elfhame, that she's reacting in this moment like a mortal, keeping her head above water, panicking. And I think it's a great that she's reacting like this in this moment because she still has a little bit more growing to do, that she's not quite ready to figure out who she is just yet. And this is one more trial that she needs to face. When Grima Mog's like, I've tried to kill you, and Jude says, you've described pretty much every important relationship in my life. I like you fine. When she's like trying to sign Grima Mog as the like new head general. And it's like, that does perfectly sum up everyone important in her life, and those are usually the people that she allows to be closest to her are the ones that have made attempts against her life. You know what's interesting? In this world of fairies where they love to make bargains and deals and love to have loopholes into things, none of them are looking for loopholes. They kind of taken everything on the surface and just want to kill the snake Cardan. Whereas Jude, a mortal, is the only one looking for the loopholes. And this isn't the first time. She's done this before. She has looked for loopholes and other bargains and deals and things. The only time that she didn't was when Cardan exiled her. That was the only time that she took a phase word at its, like, you know, surface, whatever, face value. I also really love that Jude is finally realizing, like, the dynamics that her and Cardan kind of bring to the table where, like, you know, she says, like, I don't care how uncommitted the player is. If they are planning an assassination attempt at me, I want them all dead. And she thinks, you know, maybe I ought to handle things differently, but Cardan's not here to stay my hand. That he's the thing holding her back, which is so funny because she used to think that she was the thing holding Cardan back from his worst self in the last book. When Taryn walks in, Jude notes that she looks at me as though she's half expecting an enormous serpent to be in here too, because I think Taryn knows her sister well enough that if she was going to kill Cardan, she would have done it there and then. What a great opportunity if that was her plan all along. But the fact that she didn't proves that she really does care and even love Cardan. And I think Taryn is also starting to be the first to suspect that maybe if they are in the room together, Cardan wouldn't hurt Jude. His love would prevent him from hurting Jude. I really love this like kind of heartfelt moment between Taryn and Jude, even though I'm a little bitter of how Taryn treated Jude in her attempt of earning her place in this world. She took a much more fairy approach, which is much more selfish. I've talked about this in other videos, whereas Jude has always been a little bit more mortal. She's a little bit more noble. And here she is offering a hand to help Taryn earn a place here in this world by saying like, I've seen what you've done in the past. Can you fashion me a throne room and fashion me to look the part? Giving Taryn her job and a place in this world, which is what she's wanted. And right now she's in limbo since she isn't technically married into it anymore. The fact that it's snowing inside the court is very important because once again, snow and like winter symbolizes the end of a life cycle, the end of something, the death of something. And it goes hand in hand with the second half of Cardan's prophecy that only out of spilled blood can a great ruler rise. Now, that first part, which is, spilling blood, you would think would be the end or the death is something which goes hand in hand with the snow. But the snowing inside the court is showing that this is the end of the cycle of how Elfhame has been ruled up to this point. But we will have spilled blood and would lead to a great ruler because the thing that follows winter is spring, which is rebirth. And we will get a rebirth of Cardan and Jude leading to a great rulers, but also a new, better Elfhame, a new cycle of Elfhame. Jude thinking, you have only seen the least of what I can do is a direct callback to the first book, which kind of goes hand in hand of, if I cannot be better than them, then I will become so much worse. Which is, I think, her trying to remind herself of who she had been when she had been climbing up and seizing power. To her, she probably thinks that was the height of her moment of like seizing all that right under all their noses, and she needs to channel that version of herself once again to succeed here, that she kind of needs to get past the scared version that she has been for the last almost book and a half. She needs to channel the old version of herself to win. So we learn a little bit later on that Cardan was kind of conscious during his time as a snake. So it's interesting that he goes to Inseer, which is the island that he had created in the last book. So I wonder if he was hoping that going there it would help, maybe because it would be his magic that had created the island and maybe bring him closer to Elfhame, maybe, bring him back. Like he was probably hoping for something because then he returns back to this palace. So he went there for some reason. I love in this moment that she's reacting. She's like, I am already turning into like a tyrant. I am not suited for this. I'm suited for the shadows. I never expected to rise as high. But yet when the offer was put on the table, boy, did she jump for it immediately. Since I'm reading with my literary copy, it also comes with annotations from Holly Black, and I think the one that she puts at the end of this chapter is very informative. So she says, if Jude was going to wind up as the Queen of Elfhame, I knew that she was going to need to be viewed that way by the court, so that she wasn't just ruling through Cardan, but on her own. Getting him out of the way, let me put her on that path. But this is very important because it could have been seen that Jude was ruling for Cardan, but because of the time that she was in the Undersea in exile, Cardan was allowed to have that opportunity to prove that he is worthy of ruling on his own. He proved himself during those 2 times, but now that Jude is the Queen of Elfhame, we've seen at least in 2 cases that they weren't going to listen to her until Cardan or someone else stepped in. But this time here, it's going to force her to not only grow into her role herself, as Cardan was forced to grow into his role when she was taken by the Undersea, but now she's also going to force the others to respect her.